The Revolutionary War, from April 19th, 1775 to September 3rd, 1783. First off, the Revolutionary War had about 40% active support among the populations. That is, 40% supported the Continentals, while about 15% were British loyalists and 45% were neutral. The Continentals had 90,000 troops at any one time, and 250,000 men served in the Continental Army over the course of the war. About 10,000 loyalists were serving alongside the British at any one time, and 25,000 loyalists served in the British Army throughout the course of the war. About 6,000 French troops fought under Jean Rochambeau, though French support came mostly from naval support and attacks on Gibraltar in conjunction with Spain. The French also fought the British in India, aligned with the Kingdom of Mysore against the British. At the beginning of 1775, the British Army had around 36,000 men worldwide. In order to suppress the rebellion, they had to conscript most of the army. An exact number I am not sure. The British Army had about 60,000 men at any one time in the United States, and hired about 30,000 mercenaries from various German states. Black troops served on both sides, though more with the British than the Continentals. Blacks were enslaved before, during, and after the Revolutionary War, so the Revolutionary War didn't mean liberty for black people. That may be something to keep in mind when you're puzzled as to why blacks don't seem to care much for the Constitution. To put it bluntly, Continental victory was not an amazing feat, and Britain was far more impressive given that they were overstretched with wars against Mysore, Spain, and France, especially since the Continentals had a significant popular advantage, though it wasn't complete, and thus the British had to expend soldiers to occupy any area they conquered. Also, the British troops were conscripts. Right? The Continental troops, the American troops were conscripts, and the British troops were also mostly conscripts. In 1786, a rebellion in western Massachusetts, later dubbed Shay's Rebellion, occurred in response to the state enforcing debt collection, which creditors demanded in specie, or in gold. Because farmers, of which roughly 90% of the United States was at the time, didn't have much specie, their debts were repaid by having their lands seized. This became a problem after the war because so many soldiers, right, 20% of the male population, were conscripted, and many were not paid, yet were expected to pay their debts and taxes. This led to a high default rate, and the state seizing the property of farmers and transferring it to the creditors. And I suspect most of these creditors didn't homestead the land and didn't acquire it from someone who homesteaded the land, which is to say that the private debt wouldn't have occurred on a free market in the first place, though was exacerbated by unpaid conscription by the state. There were riots and the shutting down of courthouses, and in response, Samuel Adams spearheaded a resolution to suspend habeas corpus, and he also wanted to have a distinction that, unlike under monarchy, rebellion in a republic should be punished by execution. That is, people who rebelled against the republic should be executed, was Samuel Adams's position. Then there was a battle and/or a bunch of battles, and the rebellion was crushed by the state. Somehow. I don't care the specifics of it. They lost. Shay's rebellion was used as evidence that the central state needed to be stronger so that private property could be better protected against local majorities. Right. You need to have the state to enforce the property of the few politically connected. The irony, of course, that it was the state seizing the property of the farmers, and that there were no property problems before the conscription of men and the confiscation of property. Whiskey Rebellion. The Whiskey Rebellion was in response to the Whiskey Act of 1791, which Alexander Hamilton advocated, quote, more as a measure of social discipline than as a source of revenue, close quote, and that he, quote, wanted the tax imposed to advance and secure the power of the new federal government. The Whiskey Act was similar to the British taxes on stamps, tea, sugar, and whiskey. The British had imposed a tax on distilled spirits and carriages, and now the new government was doing the exact same thing. Although I don't know if they were taxing carriages, but they were taxing booze. There were spontaneous rebellions in response, but this time The imposing state wasn't far away and overstretched like Britain. And Britain was fighting wars with France, Spain, and Mysore at the time. But it was the very near and focused United States federal government, and so the rebellion, right, was quickly crushed. And I believe more money was spent on crushing the rebellion than on the collection of the taxes itself, because the tax was not very well collected, and many municipalities ignored the tax and just shirked it.